Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Nohtal Partansky, co-founder and CEO of Sorting Robotics. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks.
All right, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review in whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Nohtal, I always like to start by asking how you got into the cannabis industry, but you were a NASA engineer. So I want to start with how you became a NASA engineer first. How did you wind up there?
Let's see. I got undergrad degrees in mechanical engineering and aerospace engineering, and then I did my graduate school at Georgia Tech for aerospace engineering, and then I got recruited out of Georgia Tech to go work at NASA JPL. So it was like a linear sort of path to go to NASA. Georgia Tech is like the second ranked aerospace engineering school in the country, so it's a funnel for JPL.
So I believe the project you were working on was called MOXIE, and it was basically a way to create oxygen so astronauts can breathe on Mars, right?
Yeah. I worked for almost 4 years on a project that is currently on Mars. It has produced oxygen, and I think they declared mission success a few months ago. And it takes in the Martian atmosphere. It heats it up to about an eighth the temperature of the sun, so super hot. And then it pulls apart the carbon dioxide, which makes up about 97% of the atmosphere of Mars, and turns into oxygen and carbon monoxide. And yeah, so that, like, the whole point of that is to have astronauts be able to breathe, and you can turn the oxygen into liquid oxygen, and then it becomes rocket fuel.
So how do you go from breathing on Mars to infusing pre-rolls with robotics?
Yeah, that was less of a linear path, as you could assume. So in my last year at JPL, we started this company, Sorting Robotics. And initially, we were building robots for organizing trading cards, like Magic the Gathering cards. I don't know if you know that card game.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, yeah. So me and my co-founders developed this system called the Roca Sorter. And eventually, we sold it to a couple of investors. And then those investors sold that company to TCG Player. And then TCG Player then sold that company to eBay a couple months ago.
Oh,
so
wow.
that was like our first product, and we sold that product line end of 2019, around the same time of us getting into the cannabis industry, and around the same time of us getting into Y Combinator, and then raising a few $1 million in funding. And the whole reason why we got into cannabis was because we were in the startup accelerator called Y Combinator, and we wanted to find a bigger market than the trading card market. And it just seemed like cannabis was really like a kind of a blue ocean market where not many people were paying attention to it because of its federal legalization status. And there's just not enough sophisticated operators like actually building automation for cannabis companies. And so we saw it was like a great opportunity. We all smoked weed, and we appreciated the mission, and it just kind of made sense from there. But it like kind of stepwise path, slowly moving into cannabis, not really with the goal of getting into cannabis, but then it just kind of made sense when we found the opportunity made, which was just like so ripe.
What was your experience like at Y Combinator?
It was pretty cool. That entity is amazing. I would say I have some people always ask me like, oh, should I go to Y Combinator or XYZ Startup Accelerator? And I just say, don't bother with the other ones. If you can get into YC, that's all you need. You get a very strong positioning for your company and a strong network to lean on. So YC is unlike any other accelerator program.
Did you have a 4-year contract with NASA? Like, was your term up there, or were you just kind of looking to get into something different?
I was an employee, so
Okay.
I didn't really have a term. No, when I was in grad school, I started a 3D printing company.
Oh, cool.
It didn't really go anywhere. I mean, well, it did go somewhere. Like we sold product to companies in the United States and Canada. And then that market is so hyper fragmented, and this was, geez, 8 years ago now.
Mm.
So it was a while ago, and the 3D printing space was kind of all over the place. And so I went back to grad school after starting that company and like kind of winding it down. And I kind of got the bug for building companies, and I figured that this is what I want to do. And I just was kind of finding what my next path forward was. And so after grad school, I had a few job offers from a few aerospace companies like SpaceX and NASA and stuff. And so I kind of wanted to get a job under my belt, like an actual job, not just a company that I started. And when I was at JPL, I was kind of always thinking like, oh, like when am I going to start a company? I kind of played around with a bunch of ideas. I actually started like a vegan hamburger company
Okay.
for about a year, and that one didn't really make sense because of a bunch of reasons. And then yeah, and then I had this idea for the trading card game sortation system. And I kind of got my other friend from NASA, and then got my other friend that like played Magic the Gathering, and that's kind of where it started. So it was very much like kind of feeling the entrepreneurial spirit, and then like, slowly finding the path forward towards actualizing on that.
Well, and when you're looking for funds or fundraising, I feel like if you lead with former NASA engineer, it opens a few doors faster.
Yeah, I would say so. And it also kind of gives you a bit more legitimacy, right?
Hmm.
People aren't going to question your financial model because like I'm better at math than they are. So like um so that usually helps. No one's saying like, yeah, do you really think the growth curve's like that? I'm like, what? Yeah, of course. So that helps. But it actually, you wouldn't think this, but sometimes it plays against me a little bit. Maybe less now, more in the early days. But people would be like, "Oh, you're just an engineer. You don't know how to like build product or like deal with customers or do business transactions because you know numbers, but you don't know what it's like to run a business or like how to deal with customers because you're like an awkward engineer, or yada yada." That doesn't come up so much anymore. In the early days, it did.
You talked about cannabis as kind of a blue ocean opportunity. How would you describe the current landscape when it comes to automation and robotics in the cannabis industry?
So, slow to adopt probably is the best way to describe it. Um, it's it's weird, right? Because in some markets, like California and the West Coast, it's a much more mature market, right?
Mm.
But it matured without mainstream automation. So that market is slowly moving its way to automation. But then you see the new markets, they're trying to adopt automation at the get-go because it's there, right? Like 4 years ago, there weren't really automation companies for California to adopt when it first turned legal. And in 6, 7 years ago, there weren't automation companies for Colorado or Washington to adopt. But today, there's a few automation companies that Michigan and Illinois and New York can go ahead and pick up. So very weird. They all follow similar life cycles, but they have different resources when they start their journey.
So when it comes to AI, machine vision, automation, robotics, what are some of the aspects of the industry that it can change specifically for cannabis operators?
So a lot of quality control is done by hand right now.
Hmm.
That can be done with computer vision. A lot of just straight manufacturing processes are done entirely by hand. Like a lot of things you think of like pre-rolls. I mean that's the thing that we do. We do an infusion machine for pre-rolls, but a lot of people are still making pre-rolls in knock boxes, which isn't like a bad idea. It's just probably not the most efficient way to do it. And then but even stuff like concentrates, right? Like, yeah, I don't know if you see those jars, of like batter or butter or diamonds, those are all done by hand, right? And that SKU doesn't really have an automation solution yet. That's something that we'll probably be working on in the near future. But there's a lot of things that just don't have a well thought out solution. Even trimming the flour, like there's not really mainstream ERP systems that handle that effectively. I mean, there's a few, but they don't, do the whole process, or maybe there's a bunch of gaps in it. And yeah, so I would say like on the technology side, everything's kind of maybe there. And then on the operator side, because it's not all the way there, it's hard for them to adopt. So there's a lot of holes and gaps on both sides.
You had mentioned your machine. What can you tell me about Gico?
So yeah, the Gico robot is our flagship product that we launched at the end of last year, and it is a pre-roll infusion device. Effectively, it is a syringe that comes into a pre-roll and injects down the center and leaves a column of cannabis concentrate. And that's any type of concentrate, not just distillates. So our system can melt down distillates, sauce, terpene, BHO, extracted materials like batter, sugar, butter. We also have been doing a lot of live resin and fresh press rosin recently. So there's a lot of applications for the system. And since the whole market seems to be moving to solventless, at least that's like a big trend, being able to figure out how to infuse your blunt or your joint with rosin is kind of the next big problem the pre-roll industry is facing. And we have an extremely good solution for that. So
I've heard a lot of the interest for infused products has been growing exponentially. Who is Gico designed for? What kind of output can people expect? Is it more for small craft operators? Is it for the larger MSOs? Who'd you build it for?
I mean, we built it for co-packers and brands, right? Which kind of falls under all of those groups, except not really, right? And so a co-packer will use the system to fulfill orders for their brands. And the Gico's wide range of capabilities allows the co-packer flexibility. But what I see a lot in the different markets, and then actually in some markets, it has to be this way. There are no co-packers in some of the states because the regulations don't allow it. So in those states, and then also in MSOs, for example, that are most of the time vertically integrated, or at least they try to be on average. Those groups, they can use the Gico as well because it's just like their in-house design manufacturing platform. That's the main targets. It's like co-packers and in-house manufacturing brands.
What kind of output, how many pre-rolls can you infuse per hour per se, with how many operators?
So with one operator infusing 100 milligrams of concentrate, you can average about 800 joints an hour. And that kind of comes out to, with efficiencies and breaks and whatever, about 5,000 joints a day, which is pretty good. That's about on par with most of even the pre-roll machines. So you can very effectively, make one pre-roll, have your pre-rolls made out of the automated device and pop them into the machine. I've seen some operators go all the way up to 1,200 joints an hour because they put two people on the machine. They got a bunch of different wheels. They do all this prep work and stuff like that. So it depends. The upper limit is probably 1,200 though. I haven't seen anyone go past that.
I have to say that I was really impressed with all the videos that you have on your website describing every process of using Gico. But for the sake of the people listening now, what kind of cleaning and maintenance goes into day-to-day operations?
So in terms of maintenance, cleaning is actually the main form of maintenance because the system as a clean system operates pretty flawlessly and it's very predictable. We see a lot of issues come where customers just don't clean the machine. They kind of run through it and then we get phone calls like, hey, why is this not working? And we're like, oh, did you clean this? And they're like, no. I'm like, oh, well, when's the last time you cleaned it? They're like, when we were supposed to. I'm like, well, the machine actually reminds you to clean it. So like, I think when the machine reminded you. Yeah, so main maintenance is making sure the machine is effectively cleaned at the end of every day. And then periodically, some of the motion control systems have to be cleaned and lubricated. And then we really only have one consumable on the item, and that's the needle. And that needle is, punching into joints or going through blunts and kind of hitting stems and buds and whatnot. So that thing you got to swap out every 5,000 joints or so, but it's a pretty cheap piece of the device, and there's not much you need to do. If you run dirty concentrates, the cleaning becomes a little bit more involved. We have to like flush the system several times and kind of make sure it's heated, and there's a little bit more effort that goes into that. But aside from that, it's making sure the system is clean at end of day, flushing the lines, and that's the main maintenance.
When you were looking at the cannabis industry and opportunities, why was it that you landed on pre-roll infusion, and what was the design and development process like when you were creating Gico?
Yeah, we've actually got asked that question a couple of times. It all kind of ties into how we started really building for cannabis manufacturers. Mm-hmm. So in 2020, we helped put up a cannabis manufacturing company and co-packing facility in Oakland, California. And I was kind of the main driving force there. And we learned all about the industry and actually operating in the industry. So as opposed to, I don't really know any cannabis automation companies that have either a partnership or deep penetration into an operating facility. But yeah, we use that facility as our R&D. And I mean, I spent a year setting up that facility and putting the management in place and setting up all the SOPs and like really understanding what it's like to be a cannabis operator, which that level of empathy, I think, is extremely important because especially here in our company, we take a pretty strong stance of the best way to know the customer is to be the customer. And so we are the customer when we're selling. And we even started like a cannabis brand, like an infused joint cannabis brand, in-house brand for that entity. And we just wanted to like learn what it was like what are the sales cycles for these cannabis brands? What is it like getting out to market on top of the brands that my company was servicing in the Bay Area? So that entity made us learn a lot, right? And one of the things that we learned was we had a brand come to us and say, hey man, can you do some infused joints for me? And I was like, yeah, sure. This was early in the first year of the company, back in 2020. And we did the fuzzy style where you paint the outside of the blunt or the joint, and then you roll it in keef. And Jesus Christ, that was terrible. Like it was super lossy. There was so much spillage. The customer didn't really like our results. I mean, we tried our best and we followed all of their SOPs, but we ended up having not enough material to do what they wanted, and the end product was okay, but just it wasn't a great way of doing this. And so I took that experience and then noticed that, especially in 2020, infused joints were kind of not even really a thing in California. There was maybe tarantula at that point, and that was about it. And fuzzies and Jeter's wasn't even a thing. And so I went back to the robotics company and said, you know what, we need to like just think about this from a first principles perspective. How would we infuse a joint? And then taking all my understanding of the cannabis industry from an operator perspective, what do I want to infuse my joint with? And honestly, a lot of people don't want to infuse with distillate. That's kind of the economy level of infusion. But even back then, people were doing live resin and like that live resin and BHO, and we wanted to make sure we could infuse that type of material. And so we figured out what was the best way to infuse joints, and that's where we started. And that's why we chose infused pre-rolls, because we noticed that was a problem that no one was solving, and that was a problem that was going to become a much bigger problem over time as the cannabis industry became more built out. And so we have this really interesting opportunity to set the foundational layer throughout the whole industry of how infused pre-rolls are made, because people are all experimenting. Do we spray the flower and put it in a knockbox, or we can't really spray it with too much distillate, it becomes too sticky. If we spray it at all, we can't put it in our machine. There's all these, like, everyone's trying all these things. And so we have the ability to say, yeah, like just stop experimenting. This is the best way to do it. When you make it with this system, it actually becomes a better end product for your customer than it would in any of those other things you're experimenting with. So that's how we started in the infused pre-roll space. And then I guess your second question was, how did the R&D happen?
Right.
Inside that same vein, we kind of noticed this problem at the end of 2020, spent 6 months developing a prototype, the initial foundation of what the machine eventually would look like. And then in the beginning of 2021, like January, February timeframe, we deployed it to the co-packing facility. And then we just started making infused joints for our customers of that facility. And yeah, we did a lot of experimentation. We started infusing with rosin, started noticing that the market was moving towards a rosin style infusion. Made changes to the machine. I mean, we ran that machine there for over 6 months before we started selling it to anybody else. And that was just co-packing with a bunch of different brands, experimenting with a bunch of different form factors, tweaking the machine. And then at the end of last year, like September, August timeframe, we were kind of like ready, and we had run several 100,000 joints for our current customers, and we're like, okay, like we can start selling this and be confident with the reliability and capability.
When you launched, you were kind of right in the height, or I guess as the pandemic was not winding down per se, but the back end of it, and people were starting to encounter supply chain issues. Has that been a problem for you as as a manufacturer, getting your hands on the right materials?
No, not really. And the reason isn't because the supply chain is broken, because it is broken. It's totally fucked. But can I curse? Can I curse on here? Like, is that?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, so it's totally messed up. But really, all a broken supply chain means is that your lead times that used to be 2 weeks are now 2 months. And so we took that approach very early in this year and end of last year, where instead of buying materials and electronics components for the next 2 months into the future, we bought electronics for the next year. And it served us well because I mean, it was kind of super expensive to do that, which is, yeah, like, there's its own, complexities that come with that. But it was good because a lot of the stuff that we needed are all out of stock right now. And when we buy for a year supply, just because I know, one, it's going to take 6 months for it to get to us. And then two, it might not be here 6 months from now. So 2 years ago, we would never do that. We would just buy, for the next 10 or 15 machines that we're building for in the next couple months. But now we buy for the next year. And that's how it's affected us. It hasn't really changed how we build things. It just kind of encumbers our cash flow a little bit. So.
Well, that shows that you had an incredible faith in the success of the machine. And I'm sure that maybe internally or with some of your investors, maybe they, weren't as certain.
Yeah, I mean, every one of these devices that we built, and we built a lot, like, I mean, we currently have 2 devices in the market, but we've actually built probably 6 different unique, no, maybe it's like 5 unique pieces of technology for the cannabis industry, a few of which we just haven't marketed because we noticed that the value to the customer probably wasn't strong enough, or maybe the industry itself isn't really ready for this piece of technology. So yeah, it is. It's definitely a calculated decision, but yeah, I mean, we're so deep in the industry on the or I mean, Sorting Robotics isn't, but at least I'm so deep in the plant touching side, and I have so many friends in there, and this plant touching entity that is operating. So like, I have a bit of a pulse that I think is probably a little bit different than like most technology providers in the space. Like, how many people can you just say like, oh, I'm gonna go throw my machine there, or like, oh, I need this company to do like a whole test program.
Right.
Yeah, like that's not a thing, right? Usually they'll like make you pay through the nose or something like that. But obviously that's that's an expensive way of doing R&D.
Yeah. What is the plant touching entity?
Yeah, so it's called Rise Co-Packing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I founded that with a few other cannabis operators at the beginning of 2020. And then we've been operating that for, almost 3 years now. And then recently we're started rolling that into a larger entity to start doing operations in different states on the co-packing side. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting experience, just understanding how difficult it is to be a cannabis operator in California. It's just, yeah, it's a mess.
So did you say you have two Gicos that are currently in the market now?
Oh no, we have a ton.
Okay.
We have over 30.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, I meant we have two different product lines.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry about the confusion.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
when it comes to loading Gico, is it all manual, manually loading? And do you have any, are you thinking about automating the process?
Yes, actually. So it's currently all manual. And that's just because there is so many different ways that materials can come into Gico. So we have people that do blunts and they hand pack the blunts, right? There's not really like even the machines can't do blunts right now. And so there's that, and then people do knock boxes, and some people actually have like an automated pre-roll machine. And so you stack Gico at the very end of your production line, regardless of what that production line looks like. And so because there's so much variability, it's kind of hard to make an automated way to load it. Uh, so currently it's all manual, and the load and unload. And that's just a symptom of the industry. However, we are looking at a few partnerships with pre-roll machine manufacturers and making it so we can build bridges between our machine and their machine, so that instead of having your nice automated machine pop everything into a box and then you then have to take everything out of that box and then put it into our machine, maybe there's a connection between that machine and our machine, and that's really the best way to do it. Otherwise, we could spend a few $1 million developing a robotic arm to like pick joints out of boxes and then manually loading them. But the value to that's pretty low. So
No, I guess that was my, naturally my next question was how it can fit into other systems. So you've been talking to pre-roll manufacturers to kind of make this an inline solution?
yeah, we've been talking to a lot of them, and that process is underway. So
Okay.
we'll see in the next 12 to 18 months how that develops, and it should be pretty exciting.
What is the scrap rate, if any?
The scrap rate of joints going through the machines.
Yeah.
I'd say it really depends on the type of input material you're working on. When you like kind of dial in the system, like let's say you start from scratch, right? And you have a new joint and you have a new concentrate that you're using. Maybe it's like a live resin that you've never used before, and it's like a new form factor of a joint that you've never used before. I would say it takes about 100 joints to kind of like dial in the machine, both on the calibration side and on like how you want the joint to be infused, because our system is pretty robust. So like you can infuse the whole length of the joint. You can change how thick that core of concentrate is, and then you can change that length. So like you can make it the whole length, you can make a short section, you can change where that short section actually lives inside the joint. So finding out how you want the joint to look and you want the joint to burn, and you like those all parameters, that takes like 10 or 20 joints of once you get it dialed in terms of the calibration. So starting from scratch, it probably takes 100 joints to figure it out. But then once you know what you're doing and you want to go into a steady state solution, it usually takes 7 to 20 joints to kind of calibrate that machine at the beginning of the day. And then those joints probably won't even be scraps. They'll probably be roughly within your dosing parameters, and then you can go ahead and make those as like not for resale samples for your bud tenders, or maybe give them to your employees for testing or something like that. But yeah, I would say it's less than. I mean, it's hard to give it a percentage because sometimes people will do a run of 1,000 and then 20 kind of feels like a lot, but most of the time people are doing a run of 20,000 and then 20 doesn't feel like a lot. So,
in your opinion, what is the ideal infusion per pre-roll, like placement and thickness? And when clients have issues, are you available to try and help them kind of walk through the process? Do you kind of provide an SOP out of the gate, like, hey, you can do whatever you want, but this is what we recommend?
yes, we do provide an SOP out of the gate. Sometimes it's not followed, but no, we when we do our installation of the machine, it's a white glove installation. So the machine arrives, my technician arrives a few days later. He's there for 3 days. The first day he's setting up and calibrating your machine. The second day he's teaching you how to calibrate the machine and then how to run it. And the third day is like normally like a half day where he'll sit back and watch you run production, give you tips and tricks to make sure that you're reducing your downtime, improving your efficiencies on your transitions. We want to make sure that when that machine is installed and our technician leaves, like you're ready to go. There's no more like testing or experimentation on how to dial in the machine. It's dialed and you can just go. In terms of what I think the ideal infused pre-roll looks like, I would say like it's like a 1 gram of flower pre-roll. You infuse in 250 milligrams of fresh pressed rosin, and normally like a 1 gram pre-roll with a 4 millimeter to 3 millimeter average grind size will be about 90 millimeters tall. So then you're going to want to infuse a length of that joint where it's 10% of it on the burn side is blank, like you're not infusing there, so that way you're able to light the cherry really easily. And then you want to stay 30% away from the crutch, so that way when you're drawing on the joint and that cannabis concentrate will melt and it gets sucked down because you're pulling on the air, it doesn't clog the crutch, because that's what happens with most infused joints these days. Like if you have like a THCA or hash rosin joint that's just been like mixed together, for one, it's not mixed together very well. It's usually not exactly homogeneous. And then for two, as you're drawing on that joint, all the concentrate and fresh pressed, or not fresh pressed, like bubble hash or THCA powder that's near the crutch will melt down into like a resin. And then as you're sucking on it, when you get halfway through, all that resin gets into the crutch and it clogs. So with our system, you can design it so that that never happens. Even though that same physical phenomena occurs, you can modulate it so that you're never going to get concentrate into the crutch, and people will actually be able to burn it all the way through. So yeah, I would say that's probably the best settings and the best type of formulation combination that you could choose.
You'd mentioned designing, 4 or 5 other machines for the industry, but you said that the industry is not ready for it yet. What type of technology are we talking about, and what sort of timeline are you thinking in terms of when the market might be ready?
So I mean, there's a few things. The most kind of interesting one that comes to mind is we built a high throughput biomass sortation system powered by computer vision. So this is very similar to vision sortation systems that that you'll see throughout the industry, and or throughout like other industries like agricultural. So like you'll see, I don't know if you've seen on Reddit, there was like this tomato sorter that was like coming down a conveyor belt, and the tomatoes are falling off in slow motion, and the ones that weren't ripe, it was like kicking them out, right?
Right.
So we made the same thing, but we made it for cannabis biomass. And that was what we did in 2019. And initially we were trying to do like kind of a market arbitrage on like cannabis trim and bee buds. And then the market like flipped on its head and it kind of messed with that dynamic. And then when we looked to sell that into other operators into the space, it didn't make sense because no one was really doing the scale. the price and margins were so high that you didn't really care if you lost out on some things here and some things there. And so that is a device which has high value because it has value in every other agricultural sector, but you really need margins to compress and for people to want to like, squeeze out, 3 to 5% more margin than they were doing before. And they also need like significant volume to justify that. And really no market is actually even there yet. And the hemp industry doesn't even care. They just like kind of just like combine everything and blast it. And they just don't care. So that'll probably be honestly like 5 years into the future where we, dust that off the shelves and then start implementing it again. And then yeah, I mean we've also done like palletization robotics that like picks things off the co-packing line and puts them into boxes. But yeah, that like you need to have an automated line to tack them on the end. And man, I would say maybe 50% of the industry has an automated packaging line for flour. Maybe more, but not a ton more. So yeah, like the whole industry kind of has to be like in agreement of what they're doing there for us to tack that on. So maybe that's like a couple years out.
I had read that you said 70% of cannabis manufacturing is done by hand, and it'll account for a $2 billion labor spend this year. How can cannabis automation robotics change that? Do you see a push for more automation, or is that just kind of accepted as the cost of doing business?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that comes with the thing we talked about in the beginning, where the mature markets, they're just like, screw it, like this is how we've been doing it. This is what our margins are built on. This is what our SKUs are built on. Don't fuck with it. It works. Like, stop, So for them, there's not really a huge push. And when they build out new SKUs or start being a little bit more creative with their product lines, you can see that, okay, they want to start with automation because they have all of these people already. And they're like, we don't want to try and like strain the workforce even further. And a lot of them have iterated through a bunch of employees to get like a workforce that works really well with their SKUs. And they don't want to mess with it, right? And so then when they do something new, they usually look towards automation. But then when you go to the new markets, they want to start with automation. So I would say that like, yeah, it's very much how you described it. Like if they already have their SOPs set up and they already have their SKUs kind of locked in, they're not really trying to change things all too much. But the new guys, and when those other companies start to grow, that's when they start looking for things.
What does the future of robotics in cannabis look like, in your opinion? In agriculture, produce, you see examples of completely automated grow rooms where computer vision is used to pick fruit or vegetables when they're most ripe. Is that something that one day will be attained in cannabis, or do you not see it evolving that far?
I mean, even in the agricultural sector, like keep in mind, that's rare. Like what you just described, like having a robot like look at a fruit and then decide if it's ripe or not ripe and then picking it. Those companies are being built right now. So there are some places where they use a little bit of computer vision for like phenotyping on like fresh cut flowers. But even that's like the cutting edge. And so eventually, yeah, I see cannabis going that way. But I mean, honestly, I don't see it going that way until there's federal legalization and we actually get a consolidated market, which honestly could be like 5 to 10 years from now, because people are still trying to figure out how to build their businesses. And that's not to say that the small, craft operators will be pushed out of the market or anything like that. It's just to say that we need to know what the products are, right? A lot of equipment, and the big thing with automation is that having a high amount of variability makes automation extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. that's why like some of the products that we're building, like at the end of the vape cartridge line and doing packaging for that, we're making it with high variability in mind. So a lot of computer vision, a lot of easy changeover, and like not huge fixed massive lines that do 10,000 things an hour, because the industry doesn't have 10,000 things an hour requirements, but the industry does have high variability requirements that will change over time. But it not for a really long time. So yeah, I mean, I see in the short term, making sure the automation for customers is highly variable, which means new automation has to be built. It's going to be very difficult for current operators to adopt stuff from the food processing industry, because those industries don't have high variability, right? Like
Right.
every water bottle looks the same, every can looks the same, every package of every package of chips looks the same. But I bet in the beginning of the industry, for the chips industry, yeah, the packages all looked crazy, right? They probably are all made with different materials, and that's where we are now for cannabis. So yeah, things are going to be highly variable for at least 5-10 years.
I understand why operators kind of push back on automation, because as you described, they've spent years honing this workforce and this process to finally get to where they like it. In other manufacturing industries, we've seen the workforce kind of push back on automation with this sort of false narrative that it's going to take their jobs or replace them. Do you see that in cannabis at all? And could you talk a little bit about how automation might lead to new opportunities to use that labor?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't see that in cannabis, and
Okay.
it's because of the same problem that I faced myself in Oakland. It's extremely difficult to staff a cannabis manufacturing company,
Hmm.
especially when you're trying to grow. And that's a big reason why a lot of the mature markets, they want to keep their processes the way it is, because maybe their packaging team's 25 people, but I guarantee you, they didn't hire 25 people and they've had that same 25 for the past 3 years. No, they went through 300 people to get the 25 gold stars that they can actually rely on, that they perform to high quality standards. And so it's very difficult to staff one of these companies. And especially in a growing market where your staffing needs spike very quickly. Yeah, it's very hard. So for operators in the space, they're not so much worried about having to fire their employees and put machines in there. They're thinking, okay, well, my company is growing. I need automation, because I can't have 10 dudes sitting around with a knockbox, or manually injecting things, or painting on distillate, or putting things into packages. Like, I need that guy to go to the shipping and receiving center, or I need him to sit on metric and make sure all my packages are compliant, or I need him to work with the logistics guys and run the truck. Like, I need him to do human things, not simple, boring, mundane things. And so that's what I see in the cannabis side, and that's really what the need is, and what we're servicing, the lack of labor. And that's where automation steps in. It's very different than other manufacturing industries, where they actually will, like, fire the whole warehouse, but here it's very different.
It sounds like your passion is in building companies. As you're building Rise and Sorting, is your plan to stick in cannabis, or do you sort of have a game plan where you grow the companies to a certain point and then look to a new venture?
I mean, it depends, right? Like cannabis, we still have a lot to do in cannabis. We have a lot to do. I mean, our product roadmap right now is like 10 solutions deep, and that's probably going to take us, 3-5 years to really knock out. Our goal eventually is to be able to offer full manufacturing integration for new markets. So right now, we have solutions for the infusion of pre-rolls. We have solutions for the vape cartridge filling line. We're talking with other groups to fill out the other gaps. And then, when Europe comes online, it'd be great if we were kind of like a one-stop shop solution for them, where they said, hey, we're going to be building out a manufacturing center in, Portugal, Greece, and the Netherlands, right? Like, what can we do? So there's a lot for us to do here. So that's kind of what I focus on what the exit might look like. I mean, it probably looks like something where a Siemens or a Honeywell moves into the cannabis sector after federal legalization, or at least 280E getting dropped. And they already supply technology to like medical device companies and pharmaceutical companies. And so they'll come into cannabis with the same lens, where cannabis will be a pharmaceutical type industry because of its medical uses. And all these operators are going to have to get up to that pharmaceutical grade. All those automation pieces of equipment are going to have to get up to at least food grade and pharmaceutical grade. And yeah, I mean, it'll be like a Siemens or a Honeywell that comes in and maybe tries to buy market share, and we would be a good target for that. But who knows when that happens? And I mean, I'm not hanging my hat on anything. I just want to build out the roadmap and provide the solutions the best I can for the customers.
Do you have a personal connection to the industry? And, is there a particular product that you guys produce that you like to partake in?
Yeah, I mean, I have a personal connection to the industry. I smoke. I smoke mostly for sleep, and for like, I like smoking way more than alcohol, and even that's how it was in college. I mean, I didn't drink for like the first 3.5 years of college, but I smoked. I don't know. I have a personal opinion on alcohol and one on cannabis, and so yeah, I mean, on the co-packing side of things, when we had our personal brand, our house brand, we had the like Gico infused joint, which is actually currently on Ease in California, and yeah, I like that, and so I like it's like a half-gram batter infused pre-roll that I made over Christmas break back in 2021, and I think it's kind of like the perfectly engineered pre-roll from my perspective, and so yeah, like that's kind of my favorite thing to use. We've been experimenting with some of our customers with like these like 2-gram rosin infused blunts, and that has probably kind of taken over in terms of my personal thing. We're not really making that on the plant touching side, but that was just like something we've been experimenting with. So I think that's probably the best product that I've ever tried. So,
before we get out of here, is there anything else that you might have left out, or anything that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience knows about yourself or Sorting Robotics?
I mean, I would say what I want to have everyone kind of understand when it comes to Sorting Robotics, our goal is to sophisticate the industry. That is the Sorting Robotics ethos when it comes to talking with our customers. And we do that in a couple ways. The first is providing technology that is highly robust, that does actually solve a problem for our customers. And then the second way is to become partners with our customers. Our support staff is very serious when it comes to providing enterprise level support. We're not a company that you're gonna buy a system from us and then it's gonna collect dust in the corner after it stops working, and you don't know who to talk to because maybe you bought it from China and there's no one to talk to, or maybe you bought it from some company here and you can't get them on the phone. All of our customers have a dedicated Slack channel that the whole company can actually look at. And so when you have a problem, it's not your problem, it's our problem. And that enterprise level of support is something that the medical device industry gets. And that's something that I think cannabis should get. And so that's the service that we're providing. And we want to make sure that when we offer that, it's a very intimate relationship and we take it seriously. So yeah, I mean, you can talk to my customers. Some of them, they swear by us, and so I want to make sure that people know that we're we're not selling machines, we're selling solutions, and we provide enterprise level customer support, not, we'll get back to you in a week sort of thing.
Well, Nohtal, it's been very interesting hearing about your journey, and as it evolves, I'd always like to learn more. So I hope we get a chance to keep in touch.
Cool. Yeah, no, for sure. We should make this a regular thing.
I'm on board. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. Finally, if you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. All right. For Nohtal Partansky, co-founder and CEO of Sorting Robotics, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.